Hello, welcome to basic science class. And before we go right into our topic or the discourse for today, I have a question, which is what animals are active at night? Most of us are very familiar with animals that are active during the day, like the domestic animals. You see them around, the cows and the sheep, even some insects. You see them, birds flying, fishes moving, and maybe you think that, okay, like human day to day, they rest at night and they don't, maybe they are not active, you know. So what animals are active at night? And there are some animals that during the day they just sleep, and at night you see them moving, you see them like walking. That's when they are more active, not during the day. During the day you might likely not see them. So in the course of today's lesson, you're going to know the animals that are active at night. That leads us to our topic, which is habitats. So by the end of today's lesson, you should be able to define an habitat, also state the types of habitats, then define aquatic habitat, and also state the factors that affect the aquatic habitat. I'll just quickly acquaint us with this, that this lesson is a continuous one, and also it is also we came all along from ecology, so we are still in that same line. And so please, if you have not seen the ecology video, I'll just admonish you that you should go right on and look for it and click on it, see it first, so that you can understand the flow. And this also will not just end there. This is just one out of three, so please do well to see everything so that you can understand what we are talking about. So what is habitat? Habitat is a specific place or environment where organisms live. So anywhere that you find organisms that they live there, they find their food there, they find water, they get water there, they get their shelter and other resources needed for their survival. That is what an habitat I mean to say. And habitat varies based on the organisms. We have different organisms and they live in different environments. They stay in different environments where their food, their necessary needs can be met, like food, water and shelter. That's the most important of all, where they can easily get access to these things. So a habitat can be as small as a leaf for an insect. So some insects live on a leaf, and it can be as large as an ocean for marine organisms such as whale, your dolphin, your fishes. They live in the ocean. So it can be as small as a leaf or as large as an ocean. So it is the natural home of an organism. That is their natural home. They are not just they are not just staying there for some time. That is where they live. That is where it's conducive for them, where it can carry out its life processes. So now we've known what habitat is. So what is the importance of a suitable habitat? Importance of a suitable habitat. Habitat provide the necessary conditions, as I earlier said, and we all know that the necessary conditions and like that every organism need is food, water and shelter. So where they can easily access this, that is where they stay. So habitat provide the necessary conditions and resources that organisms need to fulfill their basic needs. Without a suitable habitat, organisms may struggle to find food, water, shelter or mates, which can impact their survival and reproduction. Let's even take it home. Let's take it right home. For places where they were in time, I mean to say war zones, maybe in time past or presently, and war is going on in that environment. You see that they were displaced from their environment, and they take them to a refugee camp where they can get these necessary resources, food, water and shelter. But you know that the survival there is not as certain as when they are on their own in their natural habitat. So every organism too passes through the same thing. So they need a place, a suitable environment where they can have access, they can make their own food, they can have access to food, they can have access to water, shelter, and other necessary resources that they need for survival, and also to keep them in on the earth. That means also that is through the process of what? Reproduction. If not, they will go into extinction where they're no longer giving birth to any young one. When those old ones die, that means we'll not have them again in existence. So habitat help to provide is a suitable place for them to also reproduce. A suitable habitat helps organisms maintain their health, grow, reproduce, and also thrive. So what are the key components of her habitat? The key components of our habitat. First is food. Number one is food. Habitats provide sources of nourishment, whether it's plants or even animals or any other organism or specific. So it provides sources of nourishment for any organism that is staying in that habitat, that makes that place their natural home. So habitat provides sources of nourishment, whether it's plants or other organisms, or specific nutrients available in the environment. Another key component of a habitat is water. Habitats offer access to water for drinking, maintaining bodily functions, and supporting the growth and survival of organisms. I hope you know by now that if you don't take water, you can't survive for some specific period of time. You can't survive. So not just only human, every organism need water to survive, including plants inclusive. So they need water to survive. So and when we are talking about organism, I know we are talking about plants, animals. So they are also organisms. So any environment they cannot get this. This is one of their necessary need. They cannot get this. They cannot stay in that environment. They cannot stay in their environment. It cannot be their habitat. And number 3, there is shelter. Shelter. Organisms need a place to seek protection from predators, harsh weather conditions, or extreme temperatures. Imagine you just going home, for example, from school, and the sun is hot. Your consolation will be, I will soon get back home, where you can have shelter over your head. And imagine you're outside and it's very cold. Even if you have your cardigan on or your sweater on, you still long to go inside where you can be shielded from the harsh weather. So every organism need a place to seek protection from predators. That means what can kill them? Harsh weather conditions or extreme temperatures. Habitat provide various forms of shelter, such as burrows. You know that some animals lives inside burrows. That means they burrow hole into the ground. So some animals like rats, giant rats, they live inside the ground. So that is the habitat. Burrows, nests. When we're talking about nests, we're talking about birds. Bird stays in the nest on a tree or on a housetop or just on a mountain or anywhere. Tree canopies. There are some animals that stay on tree canopies or coral reefs. That means inside the ocean. There are some animals that stays there. And the next is resources. We are looking at key components of habitat. That means we're looking at things that are important for an organism before it can call that place they stay, inhabit that place. So the next is resources. Habitat provide other essential resources such as nesting materials. So you're not just there, you find birds on a tree. Most of the times they got those materials from the trees or from grasses around the tree. So it's still within where they can get what they need for their survival. So such as nesting materials, hiding place, that is hiding from predators, where you can hide. Sometimes maybe if you've been experienced to be in some environment and you hear gunshots, the first thing that comes to your mind is to run inside your house and have a shelter over your head. So hiding place or specific environmental conditions, e.g. temperature, humidity, that organisms rely on. And the next is interactions. Every organism interacts among themselves. I know we've talked about this at length when we were looking at ecology. So as I said earlier, if you have not seen that video, I will quickly tell you to go and see it before you continue, so you can understand. You don't just be in the midst of the ocean and you are just lost, so you can understand what we are actually discussing. Habitats also facilitate interactions among organisms, such as pollination, when we are talking about plants. So even some animals like some insects and others, and some animals help to pollinate other plants. Predation, competition, or symbiotic relationships. I hope you remember from the previous class where we talked about symbiotic relationship, and we have the commensalism, parasitic, and also the mutualistic relationship. So it was explained in detail in the previous class, so which are crucial for maintaining ecosystem balance. So adaptation of organisms to their habitats. So what are the things that organisms have that help them to adapt to their habitat, that help them to stay in their habitat? We have some types of them, and under it we're going to be considering some specific characteristics that they have that help them to stay in the habitat. And number one of it is physical adaptations. Physical adaptation. Organisms often have a physical features that help them survive in their specific habitats. Okay, I'm going to digress a little bit. For example, you wonder why humans cannot survive in water, despite that in a way there is oxygen in water, because we do not possess that kind of body shape that can help us to survive in water. If you check, or that can help us to live long in water. If you check the fish, you see their body, they contain gills, then they have fins that help them to move. So that physical adaptation has helped them. It's a specific feature they need to live to stay inside water, whereas they cannot stay on the land too, because they don't possess the physical adaptations that will help them to stay on the land. For example, animals living in cold environments may have thick fur or blubber to insulate them and retain body heat. Some animals that stays in cold environment, so they have thick fur. When you get to see their fur, it's very thick, it's not light, so it's thick, and it insulate them and help them to retain their body heat, so they don't lose heat easily. Because of the environment they stay. So they have developed a physical adaptation that has helped them to survive in that habitat. And the next is desert dwelling organisms may have adaptation like long legs. And when we're talking about long legs, you have the camels. Camels' legs are very long. So to traverse the hot sand, or specialized skin or scales to minimize water loss, because that place they don't have readily access to water, so they have to look for a way to survive in that environment. And one of the adaptation is having long legs. So as they walk through the hot sand, the long leg is an advantage to them. And some of them have specialized skin or scales to minimize water loss. So they don't lose water easily from their body because of the skin they have. It has helped them to minimize water loss. While aquatic organisms may have streamlined bodies, fins or gills to facilitate movement and respiration in water, humans don't have fins. So we cannot move easily in water. We can't stay in water. We can't live in water. So we don't possess gills too. Our bodies are not streamlined, unlike fishes, but their streamlined body help them. It facilitates their movement in water. And also the gills they possess help them to respire in water. As human, if you stay underwater for long and you have not been trained to swim in water, you will drown because you cannot breathe. You find it difficult to breathe because you don't possess gills. But fishes possess gills. As they take in the water, the gills help them to absorb the oxygen in the water and they live there. But humans cannot. We possess lungs. So if water enters your lungs, you're going to die. So can you see now that they possess special features, physical features that help them to adapt into their environment. And number 2 is behavioral adaptation. Do not forget that we're just finished looking at physical adaptation. That means their body structures, what they possess physically that help them to survive in their environment. And the next is behavioral adaptations. Organisms also exhibit behavioral adaptations to enhance their survival in their habitat. They have some behaviors, some characters they possess that help them to survive in such environments where they live. For instance, some animals might migrate to different habitats during specific seasons to find better food sources or suitable breeding grounds. There are animals that migrate, that's their behavior. And sometimes you might have seen this Some birds, maybe you see them in their numbers, they're migrating, and for days you see them. It's because where their previous habitat is no longer giving them what they need to survive. They need to move to another place where they can survive. Not only birds, some animals too do that. So they move from the environment, and that is their behavior. That is their behavior. You see them move at every season, either during the dry season or during the rainy season. They migrate to an environment that will give them the necessary thing they need to survive. So nocturnal animals are adapted to be active during the night. You know, our induction question is what animals are active at night? So nocturnal animals are adapted to be active during the night when it is cooler and less exposed to predators. So there are animals that are nocturnal, and we have the bats. They are more active at night. We have whole are more active at night, and some other animals. And why they have to, that is their behavior. They just have to be active at night. That is how they cannot be active during the day. So because during the day, the environment might be too unconducive for them. So, and it's safer at night. There's no sun at night. It's cooler. And at night, most animals might be resting. So they are not easily exposed to predators. That is why they are very active at night. And they have possessed some features that has helped them to be active at night, such as sharp eyes to see during the night. You know, they don't carry light, unlike human. So they have been adapted. They have this behavioral adaptation to be active at night. Some birds build intricate nests or engage in elaborate mating rituals to attract mates and ensure the survival of their offspring. That is the behavior they engage in. That is how they have been they are adapted to such already. So it's not something that they just started today. It's what they have been into over time, and it has been passed down from generation to generation. And this has also made them that whenever you see such animals, you know, okay, this is you know that this is the animal that is involved in this, because that's their behavioral adaptation. So we have looked at physical adaptation, behavioral adaptation. We also have physiological adaptations. Organisms may have physiological adaptations that allow them to utilize resources efficiently. For example, plants in arid habitats may have deep root systems to access groundwater or possess mechanisms to store water. So plants in arid habitat, that is where water are very scarce. So they have deep root system. Their roots are very deep. They enter into the ground to access groundwater, and they also possess some mechanisms that help them to store the water. So, you know, after taking the water, they don't just their physiological feature has also helped them to be able to conserve the water for a long period of time. That is their physiological adaptation. Some organisms have specialized digestive systems that enable them to digest and extract nutrients from unique food sources found in their habitats. Also, certain organisms have evolved to tolerate extreme environmental conditions such as high temperatures, salinity or acidity through physiological adaptation. The thing is, no matter how worse you seems to a habitat seems to look like, a place, an environment seems to look like, you will still find some organisms that survive there. So whether it's you have high acid there or low acid, or you have high salt, the level of salinity is very high, they possess a physiological features that help them to survive in that habitat. So the next is examples of specific adaptations displayed by organisms in different habitats. So there are some specific adaptations that some organisms displayed in their different habitats. In the rainforest, plants may have large leaves to capture sunlight in the dense canopy. If you actually enter into a rainforest, you will see that the trees there are very tall, and they have branches, long branches with leaves And you see, the canopy there is that they provide shade. When you walk under there, it's rare for you to have the sun touch your skin, because that place is dense, is densely covered by trees, by leaves. So what helps them to survive in that place is their dense canopy, so they can trap sunlight easily, that help them to produce their food through photosynthesis. While animals may have adaptation like strong limbs for climbing or camouflage to blend with the foliage. In the Arctic, that is in the cold environment, animals like polar bears have thick fur and a layer of blubber for insulation, while organisms like the Arctic fox change their fur color with the seasons to blend in with the surroundings. So some animals that live in the extremely cold region, we call them the Arctic animals. So like the Arctic fox or polar bears, they stay in cold regions, and for polar bears they have thick fur. So that's what helps them to stay in that place, and it provides insulation for their skin, so they are not easily affected by that extremely cold weather. And for the Arctic fox, they change their fur, the fur changes color to blend with their environment. So that is their physiological and specific adaptation they have for that environment. In the ocean, fish may have streamlined bodies and gills for efficient swimming and respiration. I've explained this earlier. Why deep sea organisms have adapted to withstand extreme pressure and darkness, because the more you go into the water, the more dark it becomes. So but there are still some organisms that stays in this environment. So they have developed some features that help them to withstand extreme pressure and darkness. Recently, I know you might have heard of the Ocean Gate saga and how their ship imploded in the water. It was because of the extreme pressure there. But this organism, there are organisms that stay in that place and they survive. So they have some features that have helped them to withstand extreme pressure and also to withstand the darkness in the water, in those deep water. So we have types of habitats. Very quickly, we're looking at types of habitat, and there are three main types of habitats. One is the aquatic habitat, second is the terrestrial habitat, and third is the arboreal habitat. And very quickly, we're going to be looking at this one after the other. And as I said earlier on, this is a continuous lesson. We won't cover everything here. So in the subsequent videos, the ones we don't cover here, I'm going to surely cover them in those videos. So aquatic habitats, very quickly, aquatic habitats are those that are primarily water-based. So these are animals, they live primarily in the water. Their primary habitat is water. So, and include both marine and freshwater environments. In as much as it's water, whether it's in the marine or freshwater environment, in as much as those animals live in water, we call them aquatic animals. And the environment which they live, we call it aquatic habitats. So these habitats can be found in oceans, seas, lakes, rivers, ponds, and wetlands. So what are the characteristics of aquatic habitats? Aquatic habitats have distinct features. They are primarily composed of water and have different levels of salinity, temperature, and sunlight penetration based on their location and depth. They can be shallow or deep, calm or turbulent. That is the characteristics of aquatic habitats. So what type of vegetation do you find in aquatic habitats? Aquatic habitats support various types of vegetation. Marine habitats may have seaweeds, kelp forests. You will be surprised that inside the ocean there's something called forest. Yes. So deep inside the ocean you'll find kelp forests, and you can also find your coral reefs. While freshwater habitats can have submerged plants, there are some plants that live, that you see them grow in the water, so they are submerged inside the water. Floating plants like water lilies, when you get to some water bodies like some rivers, you see some plants growing on the water. Those are called floating plants. An example of this is water lilies and emergent plants along the water edges. There are some plants that too that you see that their roots is inside the water while their leaves is outside. So these are also kind of vegetation you can find in aquatic habitat. So what type of organisms live in this habitat? Aquatic habitats are home to a diverse range of organisms. Marine habitats are inhabited by fish. You can find fish in marine habitats, whales, dolphins, sharks, turtles, coral. You know, when we're talking about organism, once again, we are not just talking about animals, we're talking about plants and what? Animals and some specific bacteria, and other microorganisms. Let me put it that way. So plants, animals, and other microorganisms. So you can find organisms that stay inside water. You can find your fish in marine habitats specifically. You can find your fish, your whales, dolphins, sharks, turtles, coral, and an array of invertebrates like the crustaceans and mollusks. So these organisms are found in marine habitat. While for fresh habitats, they support fish species like trout and catfish. So you mostly find your catfish in freshwater habitats. Amphibians like your frogs and salamanders, such as we have on the video displaying on the screen, that is the salamander. It stays in a freshwater habitat. Water birds, so you'll be surprised that there are some animals, there are some birds that live. You'll be thinking, how don't birds live on maybe on the land? So are there water birds? Yes, there are birds that live inside the water. Aquatic insects, there are insects inside the water, and a variety of plants life that you can find inside the water. So right now we're going to look at factors that affect aquatic habitats. Yes, in aquatic habitat, are there some factors that can affect those organisms staying there, or the environment or the ecosystem of that aquatic habitat? Yes, there are some, and we're just going to be considering one here, but in the subsequent video we're going to consider other factors too that affect aquatic habitats. And this one we're considering here is a very important factor that we can't just overlook, and that is turbidity. Turbidity is an important factor that affects aquatic habitats. It refers to the degree of cloudiness. You might have gotten to some water, you got to some water and you just see, well, you in your mind you say this water is dirty because you feel like it's like mud water, and that is what we refer to as turbidity. So the degree of cloudiness or haziness in the water caused by the presence of suspended particles such as silt, clay, organic matter, or plankton. Plankton is a plant. It's a plant that grows in water. So when you have them in excess, the water will be cloudy. It won't be clear. That is the word. You know, when something is not clear, you can say it's turbid. The place is just cloudy and it's hazy in nature. So what are the impacts of turbidity on water? One is it has impact on light penetration. You can imagine this kind of water that is showing on your screen there, and imagine how light will penetrate through it. It's too dirty. That's why you're going to say that light will not go through it easily. So when the water experience high cloudiness, so it have effect on light penetrating the water. And the water bodies, the organisms in the water, they need sunlight to survive also, like the plants that still stays there too, they need sunlight to produce their food. So it affects the organism in water. Turbidity reduces the penetration of sunlight into the water. Excessive turbidity can limit the amount of light, that is light rate, reaching aquatic plants and algae. You know, algae are green in nature and they produce their food too using sunlight. So it affects their photosynthesis and overall productivity. This in turn can impact the availability of food and habitat for other organisms in the aquatic ecosystem. Imagine some organisms that feed solely on aquatic plants and algae. So when these aquatic plants or algae do not have access to light, they cannot produce their food, they die in the process. Thereby it will not have an effect on other aquatic organisms that depend on these aquatic plants and algae for food. In our previous video, we were talking about the importance of aquatic plants and algae. in our previous class, I remember there was one of the class where we talked about interdependence of the ecosystem. So no ecosystem, no organism is an island. We interdepend on each other, and we talked about the primary consumer. When we look at the trophy level, the primary consumer and the primary, I mean to say the producer from the producer, which are majorly algae and plants, green plants, because they can produce their food by themselves. And then we have the primary consumer. So that is, we're talking about herbivores, like animals that feed on plants. And we have the secondary consumers. So that is secondary consumers, and then to tertiary consumers, and on we have like that. So there are some organisms that depend solely on these producers. And when I'm talking about this producer, I'm talking about the aquatic plants and algae that can produce their food by themselves. So once these aquatic plants and algae can no longer get their food, access their food readily again using sunlight, it's going to lead to a break in the food chain or in the food web in the ocean. So this in turn can impact the availability of food and habitats for other organisms in the aquatic ecosystem. So the next we are considering is influence on temperature. So when there's turbidity, and I mean cloudiness and haziness in water, instead of it for the water to just penetrate and just go straight, it's going to scatter the sunlight, so leading to increased heating of the water column. This can result in higher water temperatures, which can affect the physiology and behavior of aquatic organisms. And the next is effect on oxygen levels. Turbidity has its effect on oxygen level. Turbidity can affect the dissolved oxygen levels in water. Suspended particles can reduce the amount of oxygen that can dissolve in the water, particularly in cases where organic matter decomposes, leading to decreased oxygen availability for aquatic organisms. And I hope you understand what this will lead to when there is, because every organism uses oxygen. Okay, let me be more specific. Plants use carbon dioxide that the animal released, while animals use oxygen that plants gives off. So there is a kind of exchange there. So when there's, and you know that it is not only plants that live inside the water, whether it's the marine body or the freshwater body, that's ocean and the freshwater or the oceans. So once there's a decrease in oxygen availability, some aquatic animals is going to die because oxygen will not be readily available for them again. So they're going to lead to death of those organisms that stay in the water. The next is impact on aquatic organisms. Turbidity can directly affect the behavior, feeding, and reproduction of aquatic organisms. Some species may rely on clear water to detect prey or avoid predators, and high turbidity can disrupt these activities. Additionally, suspended particles can clog the gills of fish and other organisms, impeding their respiration and causing stress or suffocation. You know that some of these, I earlier explained that fishes, they dissolved oxygen, or they take in oxygen using their gills. Their gills help them to absorb oxygen. So imagine that the water is just too hazy, it's just too cloudy, and some of those particles that were suspended in the water as the fish were drinking or taking in the water from the through their gills, it will now cover that gill and they cannot breathe again. Imagine someone covering your nose and impeding you from breathing, covering your mouth and your nose, and you cannot breathe. The next is death. Same thing with these organisms too. When anything impedes their respiration, it causes death to them. It can cause them to suffocate to death. The next is influence on water quality. Influence on water quality. Turbidity serves as an indicator of water quality. Excessive turbidity can be an indication of pollution or sediment runoff from land, which can carry pollutants, nutrients, and sediment that negatively impact aquatic ecosystems. Imagine that there's a place, maybe a farm nearby, and they just finished fertilizing the plants thereof, and then after all, they washed off their equipment, and the waters from those fertilizers run into the water. It's going to cause turbidity, and so there are some nutrients that will be supplied into the water, but the nutrients might not be for every organism living there, so it's going to affect them in a way. It's going to affect them, so that can serve as pollutants to some organisms too, and can lead to their death. High turbidity can reduce the aesthetic value of water bodies and impede recreational activities like swimming or fishing. I know you wouldn't like to swim in a dirty river, let me put it that way, or in a dirty ocean. You wouldn't want to swim there because you feel like, wow, this is dirty. So it has reduced the aesthetic value of that water body. So very quickly today we have looked at habitat, the definition of habitat, that is where animals live, or where organisms, let me say organism, not animals, where organisms live. And we have looked at types of habitat, and while we're talking about types of habitat, we mean terrestrial, aquatic, and arboreal habitat. We have also looked at the specific key components of habitat, and we know that in every habitat there are some essential materials that needs to be present there. If not, they can, no organism can stay there. And when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about the food, shelter, and water. These are very, very important, and we can have resources and also interaction, because no organism is an island. We have to interact. So very quickly, we want to look at some questions. I might just pick 1 or 2 questions, after which I expect you to go over the rest question by yourself and attempt them. That is how you're going to know if you truly understand what you've been taught or not. So do not forget, this is basic science, and our topic is still habitat, and it's, in a way, I told you, it's a continuation of ecology, so we might get some questions also from ecology. So you click on the topic of interest, and you know the year is random, and then you get started. So as I said, I'm just going to pick some questions from the array of questions that we have. Okay, I have this question here. So the following factors affect only aquatic habitat, except the following factors affect only aquatic habitat, except we have A, humidity. I know we have not considered other factors, but I will still answer the question here, because subsequently we're going to consider them, and that's why you need to see those ones. So you say A, humidity, the second is soil type, C is temperature, D is turbidity, we just consider turbidity now, and E is salinity. I remember during the course of this we mentioned salinity at some point when I was still during the introduction. We were talking about habitats for aquatic habitats. So humidity, yes, it does. Soil type does not affect, it's not a factor that affects aquatic habitat, but you can have your humidity affect aquatic habitat. You can have your temperature. Of course, we talked about temperature under and turbidity, but we're still going to go into it in details in our subsequent class. We also have turbidity and salinity. So the right option there is soil type. So I'll leave you now to do other questions, to attempt other questions by yourself. Thank you.